Commission before the fresh election on October 17th. In the memo, Chebukati demands a raft of explanations, including why a password was created in his name and used to access the results transmission system. In a quick response, 4 IEBC commissioners led by the Vice Chair, Consolata Maina, dismissed the memo, saying it was not discussed with the rest of the commission. As soon as that letter went out, another commissioner, Paul Kurgat, dismissed the same. Our senior political reporter, Duncan Khaimba, opens up our coverage tonight with that turmoil within the IEBC.
For the last several weeks, Ezra Chiloba has been on many lips in the country, with critics of IEBC accusing him and the secretariat he heads of being at the center of everything that went wrong with the August 8th presidential election. But now he is in the eye of a storm right inside the Electoral Commission. In the leaked memo from the Commission Chair Wafula Chebukati dated 5th September, shortly after the Supreme Court had nullified the August 8th presidential election results, Chebukati is demanding answers for 12 hard questions.
As a commission,
among other things, the chairman who declared the presidential results wants the CEO to explain what exactly went wrong with the KIMS results transmission, where over 10,336 out of the 40,883 polling stations sent only text results without the accompanying Forms 34A, noting that these polling stations had 4,636,556 voters registered therein. Another question from the chairman is why two individuals, Paul Mugo and Boniface Wamae, under instructions from the director of ICT, James Muhati, created a username account and password in the name of the chairperson of IEBC without his knowledge or consent, and consequently, the same account was used to transact over 9,934 transactions in the system. Also, Chebukati is demanding to know why a key feature in the KIMS kit called GPRS and geofencing was switched off 3 days to the election. These are the features that would have made it possible to tell the physical location of every kit at any given time. The memo suggests that some 595 polling stations failed and or otherwise refused to send any results for presidential election. This is an equivalent of 416,500 voters. Another big question is why 682 polling stations had an equal number of rejected votes as the number of registered voters in those polling stations. The CEO is also asked to respond and explain what happened to printed forms that were meant to have approved security features. The chairman says in his memo that the forms were supposed to have names of candidates printed in accordance with standards confirmed by due diligence teams that the commission sent to the printer in Dubai. With regard to communication, the commission says it spent about 848 million to purchase satellite phones that were to be distributed to each constituency and county tallying centers as well as areas with no network, and was specifically supplied with the gadgets. However, none of them worked. Chebukati wants an explanation on what occasioned the massive failure in the devices that would have been used in transmitting the results. On IEBC servers used whose service providers were based in France, Chebukati seeks an explanation as to why the commission adopted and used a porous file server system to transmit Forms 34B instead of creating and using a secure IP address, which made it easy for individuals to manage accounts on each other's behalf, a clear security risk. But the memo also points to what could be another scandal in the making. The commission says it had contracted a company, MFI, to avail printing and scanning machines across the country for use on 8th August. A response and an explanation is demanded on whether the machines were supplied, fit for the purpose, as contracted, and where they were veiled and failed to work. The CEO has been asked to explain the failure. The high-voltage letter from IEBC Chair Wafula Chebukati to CEO Ezra Chiloba brings to the fore a looming major showdown between the Commission and the Secretariat as commissioners seek to absolve themselves from blame over the nullified presidential election results. Who will carry the Supreme Court cross? That is the elephant in the room. Duncan Hemba, KTN News.
Well, it seems all is not well at the Anniversary Towers. That is the IEBC headquarters. Now, just to make sense out of this turmoil at IEBC, I'm now joined with by, of course, Mark Bichachi as well as Joseph Kioko. Now, Mark, let me just begin with you. I'm sure Chebukati is waiting for answers to those 12 tough questions. Are we seeing some sort of a blame game in play from the IEBC officials?
Oh, Yusuf, there are two things that are playing out in the commission. First and foremost, there is survival tactics in the sense that the Supreme Court ruling obviously shows that there were issues behind the election. So now the question would be that Kenyans need to understand that, number one, there are criminal implications based on the evidence that was given. So based on what the ruling will be, the full ruling from the judges, you will find that there's a likelihood that there will be criminal liability on some of the commissioners or even on the Secretariat. So what I think Chebukati has done, he's gotten ahead of the game to lay blame on a certain individual so that he can come out clean. That's one angle. The second angle is whether you like it or not in any organization, if there is a breach of services, a breach of how you're supposed to conduct any process of that election, then it behooves the chairman to take charge and be able to correct and clean his house. No, those are the questions. Now, as to whether Ezra Chiloba is single-handedly responsible for those mistakes, that's something that is yet to be determined, because even in the same memo, the director of ICT is mentioned as having created a username and a password without the knowledge of the chair. So these are the questions that will be. But definitely and for sure, there will be criminal questions asked. There'll further be questions about whether people should be hired and fired within the IEBC. That is going to happen whether we like it or not. Whether it's going to affect the 17th elections is a question that we will debate for some time. But definitely, heads will roll.
Joseph, Max there says, you know, heads should be rolling at IEBC, and we're just 38 days to the rerun. Are we seeing a situation where a new scandal is going to come up at the IEBC?
Absolutely. You know, the issue is going to be that in the country today, IEBC is a scandal already. It's not going to happen. It has already happened. And as such, how the IEBC will come out to communicate and deal with this issue is what will be the question that the country will have to answer. But will they be able to rise out of the ashes like the proverbial phoenix and on the 17th be able to rescue the electoral process in Kenya? That remains to be seen.
Mark, well said. I think we have a difficulty in reaching Joseph there from a city center studio. But let me just stick with you here. And is it prudent, you know, for IEBC to first clean its house before conducting this rerun? That we're just 38 days to go.
Absolutely, they have to. But the question is, and this is what of people need to understand. An organization is not messed up by people. It is messed up by the systems as well. So it is not enough to say that so-and-so failed or so-and-so was criminally liable. The question is the system the same? Because as they say in computing, garbage in, garbage out. So if the process is messed, we cannot expect just because we've changed who is able to access it or who is able to feed the information that we will then have a credible election. And that's where it takes a lot of strategic thinking to understand that if you're going to secure an election, you have to walk into it knowing that you are securing how data is entered, how data is transferred, and how data is finally computed and displayed.
Thanks,
All
Mark,
of those things have to be clear.
Thanks, Mark, for that. Let me bring Joseph into this conversation. I hope you can hear me now. Joseph, good evening. And you've heard what Mark there said, that he expects, heads to roll at the IEBC. Now we've seen the memos there from the chair to some of the members of his secretariat. Are we seeing a situation where there's a lot still in the closet?
First, thanks for hosting me. I think there's a bigger problem. And the role of IEBC as a neutral arbiter must be respected at any one time in this electoral contest. There are 39 days to the election. These shenanigans that are happening to IEBC, one, are disenfranchising one part of the political contestants. It is very possible right now that a narrative is being created that these elections were stolen, and they were stolen because of these gaps that have been explained. You understand?
Yes.
So even the element of a fair contest is being negated by the day. Now, will the parties involved be able to accept the outcome? I don't think so. We need to go back to the 2007 election and look at the effect of public pronouncement by electoral officials. When the old man, Samuel Kivuitu, was asked, were the elections of 2007 free and fair? He said he doubts it. The moment he said he doubts it, this country went up in flame. Now, what Chebukati and Chiloba are doing, the narrative they are spreading out, the net effect is that the NASA people somehow start feeling this election was stolen. The Jubilee people somehow start feeling somebody inside that commission was out to scuttle their win.
Joseph,
now, which narrative
let's shift focus.
Becomes
Joseph,
hard to maintain.
If you could hear me, let's shift focus to these two main protagonists, that is NASA as well as Jubilee. NASA, of course, after that ruling, have clearly indicated that they are not going to deal with IEBC as it is currently constituted. The IEBC chair went ahead, changed some of the members of his secretariat, came up with some committee who are going to oversee the rerun. Then Jubilee objects those names. Don't you think these two parties have also put IEBC in some sort of a tight corner?
No, IEBC has placed themselves into a tight corner. What needed to have happened is that they needed to wait for the Supreme Court ruling in totality, so that the judgment that comes out is able to articulate these are where the gaps were. And based on those gaps, be able to start moving forward in cleansing the next electoral process. They have gone ahead. They are the ones who are leaking out these documents. This document, it's not an outsider who's doing it. It's either between Chebukati or Chiloba who's leaking out. Most likely it's Chebukati. Yes. The net effect is
now,
each
Mark,
party is digging down.
Let me bring Mark into this conversation.
Has gotten fodder.
Yes. Let me bring Mark once again into this conversation. Now, Mark, what's the way forward? It seems the country might be plunged into a crisis.
One of the things that this is going to do, it's going to be, I keep saying that there are 3 candidates already on that ballot paper on October 17th. The first 2 candidates we know, Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta and Raila Odinga. The third one is the IEBC. The country is going to be looking at the IEBC and to see whether finally the IEBC will be able to deliver a free, fair, and credible election. That being said, in the time period that is there, the problem that the IEBC have is an issue of a country where every truth and every lie is comprehended and understood either as Jubilee or NASA. These institutions have religious proportionality in our minds, in the sense that just like Jesus, if he said the sky is red to the Christian, every Christian would believe it. And like Muhammad, if he said the sky is green, every Muslim would believe it. That is how it is between NASA and Jubilee. Therefore, the IEBC has to be very careful to come out as independent. That is the referendum. Kenyans are going to ask the question, why are you independent? Let us remember that it is entirely possible that if Raila Odinga wins, that Jubilee will go to court. And if Jubilee wins and IEBC messes up, Odinga will go to court again. So the question here is, can Chebukati and his team, because we all know, in all likelihood, Chebukati will still be chair come October 17th. Will he be able to deliver to the Kenyan people an IEBC that is independent?
Yeah. Well said, Mark. Of course, I'm going to engage with you later on with this show. And Joseph, before I get your final comment, now let's take a look at what happened in Ghana. And Kenya is going through its fair share of what can best be described as an electoral quagmire. But there are examples of successful electoral processes here in Africa. One such case is Ghana, as I've already told you. The Electoral Commission chairperson, Charlotte Osei, spoke exclusively to KTN's Trix Ngando on a recent visit to Kenya. This is what she had to say. Take a look.
We've worked hard with the political parties on our process to make sure that the process is so strong that the process is accepted by everyone. And of course, we've had, I think, to be fair, candidates who have put national interest above self so that when they lose, they are willing to concede. But again, I think it's making sure and putting a lot of effort into ensuring that your process has a lot of credibility and transparency and inclusiveness. I'll give you an example. When we're printing ballot papers in Ghana, we print it at local printing houses, and every political party has representatives at the printing house. So they watch the ballot papers being printed. They monitor the movement of the ballot papers to the police and to the final destinations at the polling stations. On election day, before voting starts, they have to ascertain that the boxes are empty. They put their seals on the boxes. So we include them in every step of the process. So at the end, it's very difficult for a politician to genuinely reject the results unless he can also show irregularities in the process. So I would say that the key is a lot of inclusiveness, a lot of transparency, and working together with the political actors so that they accept the system and you have their buy-in. As electoral commissions, you tend to work within your own national context. But the challenges are very similar across the board. And we need to start working across nations and strengthening our electoral commissions. So Ghana has learned a lot from Kenya. Kenya can learn a lot from Ghana. And just for civic society to understand that the problems you see in Kenya are not peculiar to Kenya. And if they've been managed elsewhere, they can be managed in Kenya. But we need to be talking, we need to be engaging, even more so with the political actors, because a Kenyan problem is not just a Kenyan problem, it's an African problem.
Following that interview, Joseph, one of the key words the Ghanaian Electoral Commission chair spoke about is credibility. Do you believe or do you expect IEBC, with the current push and pull, are going to deliver a credible election this time around?
They have no choice. They have to deliver a credible election. Mm-hmm. They must deliver a credible election. I think it is incumbent on them to come out tomorrow or in the next 2 or 3 days, first to show Kenyans a show of might, that the commission is one and stands united. Mm-hmm. Secondly, they need to meet the leaders of the main political actors, the chief agents of NASA, the chief agents of Jubilee, so that they can take them through the process of what is happening today and how it will lead to a better and credible election. Mm-hmm. Then the mistakes that were committed in that election that was nullified must not be repeated. People want to go out and vote. People voted. People want their votes to be counted. People want the winner to be announced. As a country, we need to move forward. We do not want a situation where we are in a perpetual state of campaigning, that this election that might even be moved forward. Let it not be moved forward. Let it stay where it is. Let people go out to campaign. Let the Electoral Commission get its act together. Mm-hmm. We've paid them a lot of money. We've gone through a lot of process of getting them to where they are, to making them independent and running their affairs as they should. Mm-hmm. Then what we need as Kenyans is to get a credible election. And all actors must be involved moving forward in getting it right from today and moving forward.
Joseph, I think I think your point is home and dry. Of course, this is a conversation we also want our viewers to engage in, and we did ask them earlier if they believe that the IEBC will withstand internal turmoil to deliver a credible presidential election. Many thanks, Joseph Kioko, for your input. Now let's cross over to a neighboring country, that is Tanzania, and there is tension in Tanzania following the shooting of a prominent opposition figure in the country near his home in the capital. Lawmaker Tundu Lissu of the Chadema party, who recently faced criminal charges protesters after he called President John Magufuli a dictator was wounded by an unknown assailant in Dodoma. Tanzanian Home Affairs Minister Mwigulu Nchemba confirmed the incident after visiting the hospital where Lissu was being treated. He added that the government will issue a statement after receiving a medical report. Lissu, one of Tanzania's most vocal opposition politicians, was shot in the stomach, leg and arm, according to the Dodoma Regional Medical Officer, Dr. Charles James.
Katika jamii, katika mtazamo unaliangalia kama ni swala la kigaidi.
Of course, latest report from Tanzania indicate that he has been discharged from hospital and is going to be brought to Nairobi for further treatment. Now, over to some development in the youngest nation in Africa, that is South Sudan. And South Sudan's government has described sanctions on 3 leading figures as unfortunate. The U.S. has imposed sanctions on 2 senior South Sudanese officials and the country's former army chief in a warning of increased attacks on civilians. Information Minister Michael Makwei Luth, Deputy Defense Chief Malek Ruben Riak Rengo, and the former head of the army, General Paul Malong, have been banned from traveling to the U.S. and had their assets frozen. 3 companies owned by the Deputy Defense Chief have also been targeted. The U.S. Treasury said the men had abused human rights and tried to derail the peace process. There is currently a civil war in South Sudan, which began in December 2013. Attempts to get the sides to stick to a peace deal have not been successful. Meanwhile, the United Nations mission in South Sudan is boosting its patrols in South Sudan's western Equatorian region, where it distributed humanitarian aid to displaced people who are sheltering in makeshift camps without access to clean water, food or shelter. The villages of Bangasu and Remens in western Equatorial area are suffering from a volatile security situation with ongoing violence between armed groups involved in the South Sudanese political conflict. Tens of thousands have died and 3.5 million of the country's 12 million citizens have fled their homes, creating Africa's largest refugee crisis since the 1994 genocide against the Tutsis in Rwanda. This was the first visit by troops serving with UNMISS since July and distributed cooking pots, buckets as well as food.
It's really very difficult for us to survive in this place because even we run, even all our food items was rooted, and even all our food items are now spoiled. We are just staying, waiting who can help us by providing us a little food that we can help our children.
Because we are scared because there is no protection. Anybody can just come and enter the camp. As it has happened several times back that the rebels can come and enter the camp, begin to beat people, begin to loot things from people. That's why we are putting our request that the UN should come here to protect the civilians here.
Well, over to developments in Togo, where hundreds of thousands of opposition supporters protested across the West African state of Togo on Wednesday to demand constitutional reform. At least 100,000 protesters took part in the capital, Lomé, and similar demonstrations took place in the cities of Sokode, Dapong, and Kara, and half a dozen other locations. Opposition party leader Jean-Pierre Fabre called the demonstration unprecedented. Many brandished placards denouncing the regime of President Faour Nassibe, whose family has been in power for the last 50 years. The protests have been called by a coalition of opposition parties who vow to continue with the protest.
We will see this through. That is what we are working towards, and I am convinced that if the movement continues to grow as we hope it will, it's going to have to abdicate. Tomorrow, I think the fortress will fall. You have all these people. It's happening in Mango, Dapong, in Kara. This mobilization cannot lead to nothing. And seeing as we try to have talks just to obtain a little, and they do not want to give us a little. Today, we are demanding everything, and that is their fault. In Kara, there is UNIR, ruling party militia, that arrived very early on the ground and prevented demonstrators from gathering and marching. There was manhunt, even going into houses, and police officers supported the militias to drive out our demonstrators, our militants, who went out to walk peacefully.
Well, over to South Africa, where firebrand opposition leader Julius Malema is the talk of the town for all the right reasons. The 36-year-old founder of the Economic Freedom Front, a party that is EFF, got his second honor, a Bachelor of Arts degree in philosophy through the University of South Africa. The ceremony was attended by his grandmother, Sarah, who raised him since he was just 14 years following his mother's death. His wife, Mantwa Mantlala, and members of his party also attended. The subject of he has been the subject of ridicule after a grim certificate from his final year in school was published in the media. Malema has since quietly furthered his studies. This is a big deal in a country where many young black people struggle to get a good education due to lack of funding or even access to opportunities to study later in life. Malema is a fierce critic of President Jacob Zuma. Now, they say don't judge a book or a magazine by its cover. A Nasty Boy is not a gay magazine. In a country where homosexual acts can be punished with 14 years in prison, this provocative publication featuring photos of men in miniskirts say it is simply pushing the boundaries and questioning what it means to be masculine in Nigeria.
A man in makeup and another in a dress. This is not your typical image of masculinity in Nigeria. And that's exactly the point of this photo shoot. The magazine A Nasty Boy aims to challenge gender constructs.
The idea that men can only wear pants or shirts, you know, when there are other men that would want to wear skirts and then there are other men that would want to wear makeup. So why don't we make it okay for them to do that? And so it's, you know, every day trying to tell the stories of these many people and then allowing them to feel among and then to feel very Nigerian, which they are.
While the photos in the magazine are never sordid, they always try to push boundaries. But they can be dangerous boundaries to cross. In Nigeria, homosexual acts can get you 14 years in prison. And photos like this are seen as very provocative in this conservative society.
Men are not really allowed to express themselves. I mean, we're not allowed bisexuals and stuff like that. So it's like, it's very tight. So like for a brand like this that's coming up, I would say it's good. It's something different for the people who like to express themselves, who like to be themselves, who like to be different.
The gender bending goes both ways. The girls in the photo shoots also subvert traditional concepts of femininity.
This is the first time that someone has actually played with the gender roles, because in Nigeria we're very conservative. So girls are meant to wear dresses and look pretty and have their nails done. I don't have my nails done.
The online magazine went live in February this year, but creator Richard already has plans for a print version. He hopes to ride the wave of Nigerian fashion's increasing popularity abroad and bring his taboo-breaking work to an even larger audience.
Well, it is Thursday, the 7th day of September. Let's now take a look at events happening in Africa.
This is KTN News.
Mapenzi ni kama nyasi, popote hujiotea, lakini hapo pale yalipoota pameanza kukauka, kumeanza kuingia changarawe. Ufanyeje?
Ile haki yake akimnyima